we have a big news coming in from the India-EU FTA, which is halfway there. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has said that more than 50% of the chapters under the India-EU Free Trade Agreement have been agreed upon. He confirmed that 10 out of 20 chapters have been closed across key areas, while another 4 to 5 chapters have been agreed upon in the principle. Now, an EU delegation is expected to arrive in India next week ahead of the EU Trade Commissioner's visit to New Delhi later this month or early December, when both the sides are hoping to wrap up the deal. Listen in.
Several areas we have agreed to close 10 out of 20 chapters. Another 4 or 5 chapters have in principle been broadly decided, and on more and more issues we are leading towards convergence, so that when their team visits next week for the next round of negotiation, or the Trade Commissioner visits India maybe end of November or sometime in December, as we discussed, we should be in a position to make significant and substantial progress towards closure. We are working towards a fair, equitable and balanced free trade agreement, recognizing mutual sensitivities and strengths, and working in a spirit of partnership to promote trade, investments, technology flow, mobility, etc.
Meanwhile, Piyush Goyal has said that India has strongly presented its views on the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or the CBAM, during the ongoing India-EU FTA negotiations. Listen in to that bite as well.
बहुत विस्तार से बात हुई है और भारत ने अपने विचार सीबैम के बारे में बहुत तीव्रता से रखे. It's moving in the right direction.
So what could this deal mean for Indian exporters, manufacturers and also the consumers? Joining us now is Sangeeta Godbole, IRS and former trade negotiator, India-EU and India-EFTA FTA, to help decode where things stand and what lies ahead. Welcome to the show, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So to start with, where exactly does the India-EU FTA stand today? We are hearing that over 50% of the chapters are done. So would you say that we are nearing the home stretch, or do the tough bits still remain there?
So from my experience, I think 50% is the 50, 60, 70% is the level which is easy to do, Those are the cherry picking kind of things where a little bit of discussion and the negotiators can get somewhere. But the toughest parts are there until the last bit, and those are the ones that really can make or break a deal. Therefore, I think it is great if we will be able to close, but 10 of 20 chapters to me as a former negotiator doesn't really say much.
Right. And, because the timeline everyone's watching is the end of 2025. So do you think that's a realistic target, or are the pending chapters, especially, on the market access and also carbon regulation, still too thorny to resolve quickly?
So I think there are multiple chapters which are quite thorny in the India-EU FTA negotiations. I've written extensively on one of those on energy and raw materials, and that thankfully has been kept in abeyance now. But EU has this huge normative ambition, and a country like India will find it very, very difficult to agree to many of the provisions that EU has put in public domain on their website. But times are changing, so both India and EU are under various international pressures, and I really hope that better sense prevails and that EU climbs down from many of its positions. And the words that the minister uses, fair, equitable, and balanced. That is what we have been saying since 2005. That is what we want, and that is what India is not getting, and that is why this long, almost 20 years of negotiations with the EU.
Absolutely, Sangeeta. One of the major roadblocks seems to be the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, or the CBAM. So could you unpack what this really means for India, and also whether there's any sort of middle ground that both the sides can agree upon?
So this CBAM, a lot of it has been discussed on this carbon border adjustment mechanism in the Indian media. Basically, EU wants to slap fees on imports from various countries, India being one of them. We sell steel and aluminum, which would attract these duties. We deem them to be very, very unfair, because we have to pay fees at the EU's ETS rates, no? Emission trading system. They are very, very high, around 84, 85 euros for 1 ton of carbon. If this is the kind of pricing that we have to pay, then our industry will find it very, very difficult to access the EU market. But CBAM is just one part of it. There are so many others also in the pipeline, the EUDR, the deforestation regulation, the EU CS Triple D, corporate social due diligence directive. So all these are very, very difficult for Indian companies. They impose an unnecessary cost, and I think India has been negotiating on this. And if we find middle ground, great, because even the European industry has been in a bit of a rebellion against CBAM. They are finding that it will be very difficult for them to access the global markets. And that's exactly what Minister Goyal had also said earlier, कि ये तो इनके पैर पे कुल्हाड़ी type का हो जाएगा. And that is exactly what the EU industry is also experiencing. So I hope that they find some middle ground, that a carve out is made for India or given a longer time frame. Or actually, in my mind, even time frame is not the longer time frame is not the right thing, but a special carve out for India. If that is got, then I think there is something which we have gained in this.
Absolutely, Sangeeta. Even I hope that ये जो अपने पैर पे कुल्हाड़ी मारने वाला सिनेरियो है ये ना हो. And the CBAM isn't only the issue there. Sectors like steel, autos, and labor-intensive exports are also under the spotlight. So, from India's side, where do you see the biggest vulnerabilities? Are these sectors likely to get adequate safeguards, or will they have to make concessions?
So the greatest vulnerability for India, and I have written on that earlier, is that as of now, almost 80% of our exports in 2022, that is the WITS database, 80% of our exports go to EU at less than 1% tariff. Right now, India already a very large chunk of our exports is going there, and that too, in 2005 when the negotiation started, our exports were around 19 billion, 19. Now they are in the region of 75 billion. So we have in gross numbers the exports have increased, and in terms of percentage, now 80% reach the EU at 1% or less applied tariff, right? So these exports are not going to get any leverage out of this FTA, or very little leverage they will get, right? So the term balance is what Minister Goyal always, this is always in the Indian readout, these three terms. So the balance is what we need to get from the EU, because we are giving them a huge market, a very rapidly growing market, and we will have to reduce tariffs across the board. Of course, some sensitive things like auto, wine, etc., may be kept a little bit and the Indian agriculture, of course, will be kept away from the tariff openings. But still, India gives a huge market to the EU, and where then is the balance? So those are the big ones that, those are the ones that will be negotiated now. Once that the basic chapters are finished, the difficulties will now start propping up, where, it's only negotiated at the chief negotiator level, finally at the ministerial level, and sometimes even at a higher level. So I think there should be a lot of work that needs to be done to get that balance for us.
Absolutely. So the focus will now lie on the balancing aspect of it. And also, that leads me to another crucial question there. So India has long sought special treatment for labor-intensive industries also, like textiles and leather. So how realistic is that, that the EU agrees to, carve out, given its own domestic sensitivities also?
So the thing is that textiles and leather and agriculture, these are the three areas that will really benefit out of EU's tariff reduction if that is done well, okay? Because those are the areas where EU still has very high tariffs. So in fact, textiles and agriculture are the only ones who will gain in case there is an FTA. So I think textiles are very much gung-ho about it. On the labor intensive part, again, EU has this trade and sustainable development chapter and labor and so many other chapters where they could make a target out of Indian industry. And that is where India needs to really guard itself in terms of text, in terms of the what we agree to with the EU. So I think, yes, labor intensive industries, and those are the ones that we really must focus on. But those are the ones that will gain if EU reduces tariffs on agriculture goods and textiles.
Absolutely, Sangeeta. And just to wrap it up, if you had to, sum it up in just one line, so what's the biggest takeaway about this India-EU FTA right now for our viewers?
So the biggest takeaway is, it is really a test for India to negotiate because, we are also under pressure from so many angles. We want a partnership with the EU, but we want something which can give us some substance. No, it should not be something that India just opens up and the EU doesn't give anything. So that innovation in the agreement, what is it that India will ask and bind EU to give us? For example, investment or green technology or tech transfer. So that really is India's test right now, I think.
Right. Thank you so much, Sangeeta Godbole, for being with us and, sharing those key insights with our viewers. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for calling me, and it was great talking to you.